hidden valley hums with ancient and untamed power. Elrond, half-elven, stands at its edge, his hand pressed against the cold stone of the Misty Mountains. He feels a raw, chaotic magic surging through the rock, a wild energy that could either create a paradise or tear this place apart. He knows he must forge a sanctuary here, a refuge for all free peoples against a growing shadow. This will be Rivendell, but to build it, he must risk his own spirit to bind the wild energies of the land. By the end of this story, you will understand why this specific location, where the world's magic converges, was the only place such a refuge could exist. We will uncover how a place of chaos was calmed into a haven, and what eternal price its founder paid for that peace. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? Have you ever wondered what it truly costs to build a sanctuary in a world falling into shadow? The air itself crackled with unseen conflict as Elrond led his small company forward. His companions, elven masons whose hands could shape living stone, and lore keepers who remembered the first songs of the world, felt the valley's heart resisting them. They arrived at a deep gorge where two waterfalls collided in a perpetual, roaring mist. But this was no ordinary water. Spirits of air, visible as shimmering vortices, wrestled with spirits of water, their forms flowing like liquid crystal. The elements were at war, and the raw magic they unleashed threatened to tear the very ground asunder. Elrond knew that to build here was to build upon a battlefield. He could not command this power, for it was as ancient and wild as the world itself, but he could ask for its attention. He stepped between the clashing energies, a lone figure against the storm, and began to sing. This was not a song of domination, but one of profound respect and gentle invitation. His voice wove a melody of still pools and quiet breezes, a promise of the peace he hoped to create. The song cost him dearly, drawing directly from his own spirit, and the strain was immediate. Yet the warring spirits slowed their frantic dance. The roaring mist softened to a gentle spray, and the shimmering vortices of air settled into a slow, graceful whirl. In that fleeting moment of calm, the first foundation stone was set into the earth. The masons worked with a speed born of desperation, securing the stone just as the echoes of Elrond's song faded. The elemental conflict did not cease, but it lessened, as if the land itself had taken a single, deep breath. This small victory proved the magic here could be influenced, but it also revealed the immense personal cost of each intervention. Elrond had stilled a single storm, but the valley was filled with countless more. The first foundation stone stood as a solitary testament to a fragile hope, but the wider world of elven politics remained unmoved. Elrond returned from the valley to a chamber of cold marble and colder stairs, the air thick with the scent of blooming night flowers and open skepticism. He stood before a council of the great elven lords, their robes like spun moonlight, their faces carved from ancient, unmoving wood. He spoke of Imladris, of a refuge forged not in a place of quiet power, but at the very heart of magical turmoil. He described a sanctuary that would not resist the wild energies, but would instead weave them into its very walls, creating a bastion unique in all the world. The lords listened, and then they argued. They called the site a death trap, a folly that would consume the very people it sought to protect. They saw only the chaos of the converging magics, not the potential within the storm. The debate raged, a tempest of polished words and deep-seated fear. Elrond watched his political alliances, carefully built over centuries, begin to fracture and fall away like old plaster. He had a choice, stark and simple. He could bow to the council's wisdom, abandon the valley, and preserve his standing. Or he could trust the foresight that had shown him a future where this specific refuge was the only thing standing between hope and utter darkness. In that silent, weighty moment, he made his decision. He would build a Mladris without their full consensus. The cost was immediate. Allies he had counted on for ages turned their backs, their loyalty eroded by what they saw as reckless arrogance. But from the ashes of those broken alliances rose a different kind of support. The masons who had set the first stone, the lore keepers who had heard his song, calmed the elements, and a handful of warriors who valued conviction over comfort. They gathered around him. Their loyalty was not born of political convenience, but forged in the shared vision of what could be. This hard-won solidarity, however, came with a price. The new sanctuary was now isolated, cut off from the broader support of the Elven realms. Whispers of dissent followed them back to the valley, murmurs that Elrond had overreached, that his haven was doomed before the first roof was raised. His resolve, already tested by the land itself, now faced the sharper, more personal test of doubt from his own kind. He stood at the edge of the construction once more, the weight of his choice settling upon his shoulders like a heavy mantle. He had the land, he had a handful of the faithful, and he had a vision no one else could fully see. It was all he had, and it had to be enough. The whispers of doubt followed them even into the earth. With his most trusted lieutenant, Irestor, at his side, Elrond descended into a labyrinth of caves deep beneath the valley. The air grew cold and still, yet it vibrated with a malevolent energy. Here, the untamed magic had given birth to entities of pure shadow, formless things that drifted through the rock, feeding on the chaotic power. They were not creatures of flesh and blood, but manifestations of fear and discord. Irestor's hand went to his sword hilt, his instinct to cut and purge, but Elrond stayed his arm. To fight them directly would be to fight the valley's own heart, a battle that would only strengthen the shadows. Destruction was not the answer. Instead, Elrond knelt on the cold stone, his own inner light a fragile candle in that oppressive dark. He did not raise a blade or shout a spell of banishment. He began to weave. From the core of his being, he drew threads of pure, calming energy, spinning a delicate and complex net of light. It was not a wall, but a gentle filter, a ward that did not seek to destroy the shadowy entities, but to pacify them, to soothe their frantic hunger. The effort was immense, a slow and deliberate draining of his own spirit. As the luminous net settled over the cave, the shadows did not vanish. They slowed, their frantic movements calming to a listless drift, as if falling into a deep and dreamless sleep. The immediate threat was contained, and the first true, defined boundary of the sanctuary was drawn not in stone, but in light. When Elrond stood, Irestor saw the cost. A new, permanent fatigue had settled in the Lord's eyes, a weariness that no rest would ever fully erase. They had won a crucial victory, proving that the land's dangers could be tempered without violence. Yet the silence that returned to the caves felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The ward held the shadows, but in the deep places of the world, something older and far more aware had taken notice of the light. The deep silence of the warded caves was broken by the rhythmic, earth-shaking tread of heavy boots. Narvi and her stone speakers had arrived. These dwarves were not warriors, but artisans whose craft was as much song as it was strength. They listened to the bones of the earth, and the mountains answered. Yet when Narvi first saw the elven masons at work, her face, carved from the same granite as her home, hardened with disbelief. To her, their methods seemed like whispering to the wind, all elegant gestures and fleeting songs that left no solid mark. A foundational argument erupted almost immediately. Narvi demanded they blast a foundation trench deep into the bedrock to anchor the sanctuary with unshakable dwarven stonework. The elves recoiled, warning that such a violent assault on the mountain would shatter the fragile calm Elrond had bought with his own spirit, awakening a backlash of raw magic that could scour the valley clean. Elrond stood between them, the tension thicker than the mountain mist. He saw not two opposing methods, but two halves of a single, necessary solution. He proposed a compromise that seemed impossible to both sides. The dwarves would not blast. Instead, Narvi and her stone speakers would place their hands upon the living rock and sing. They would sing not of conquest, but of connection, channeling the mountain's profound and ancient stability upward into the foundations. As their deep, resonant chants vibrated through the stone, the elven masons and lore keepers would sing their own melodies to the turbulent air, weaving the chaotic skies into a canopy of calm. It was a symphony of earth and sky, a fusion of crafts that had never before been attempted. The first day was a discordant mess of clashing harmonies and mutual frustration. But slowly, grudgingly, something shifted. The dwarven songs, grounded and powerful, began to provide a steady rhythm for the elven melodies to dance upon. The mountain's stability rose to meet the calming skies, and for the first time, the warring magics of the land did not just lessen, they began to harmonize. A new, stronger power grew from their union, a resonance that made the very air hum with potential. But the land, feeling this new and structured power imposed upon its wild nature, did not yield peacefully. As the joined songs reached their peak, the valley itself stirred in its sleep. The ground trembled, not with the stable rhythm of dwarven song, but with a deep and angry shudder. Fissures snaked across the half-built courtyards, and from the newly opened wounds in the earth, a searing, emerald light began to bleed forth. This was not the shadowy fear of the caves. This was the land's raw, elemental heart, and it was now awake, and it was furious. The earth split with a sound like tearing cloth, and the emerald light that poured forth was not a glow, but a scream of pure, untamed magic. It struck the half-built arches and scaffolds, and where it touched, solid stone flowed like water, and then hardened into grotesque, twisted shapes. The harmonious song of dwarves and elves shattered into cries of alarm. Yet this was only the valley's opening gambit. From the high snows, the meltwaters heard the call. The Bruinen River, normally a silver ribbon, began to swell. It did not rise with the slow patience of a spring flood, but with a violent, conscious intent. Its waters turned the color of churned slate, and they carried not just fallen trees, but boulders torn from the riverbed, hurling them forward like weapons. This was a magical rage, a deliberate assault, aimed at scouring their work from the valley forever. The river was coming for them. Elrond saw the wall of water thundering down the gorge, and knew that no wall they could build would hold it back. To fight it with force would be to declare war on the land itself, a war they could not win. He made a choice that seemed like madness to every onlooker. He walked directly into the oncoming torrent. He did not raise his hands in a gesture of command. He did not sing a song of domination. He stood firm against the crushing force of the current, the water tearing at his robes, and he began to speak. His voice, though nearly drowned by the roar, was not pitched to shout. It was a quiet, intense stream of reason directed at the spirit of the river itself. He did not ask it to submit. He offered it a purpose. He spoke of the sanctuary they were building, not as an invasion, but as an honor to the power of this place. He promised the river that if it chose to spare them, it would not be diminished. It would become the eternal guardian of the valley, its voice the first warning to any who approached with evil intent, its power woven into the very definition of the refuge. Its flow would be the boundary that defined Imladris. In that moment of desperate negotiation, a pact was forged. The raging waters did not merely recede. They slowed, and then they settled into a new, deeper channel, their color shifting from furious gray to a clear, powerful blue. The river had acquiesced. It had accepted the role Elrond offered, but such a pact is never one-sided. As the waters calmed, every elf, every dwarf, every soul in the valley felt a new connection snap into place. Elrond's own spirit was now bound to the river's flow. His life force and the water's course were intertwined. He would feel its strength as his own, but he would also feel every injury it suffered, and should its flow ever be broken, a part of him would break with it. The river was now the sanctuary's guardian, and Elrond had become its eternal warden. This hard-won peace with the water and the stone was not the end of the negotiation, however. It was merely the opening move in a far greater and more subtle conversation with the land itself. Peace with the river was a victory written in water, not stone. The very next morning, a breathless scout found Elrond standing at the new riverbank. The scout's report was not of the land's fury, but of a new, more familiar danger. Twisted things, creatures with too many legs and no eyes, were gathering at the high passes. They did not attack, not yet. They simply watched, a silent, shambling audience, drawn by the beacon of concentrated magic that Rivendell was becoming. The sanctuary's light was attracting moths, but these moths had claws and a malevolent hunger. A council of war formed instantly. Narvi and the warriors called for a swift, brutal purge to cut the rot out before it could fester. But Elrond saw a more terrible truth. To spill blood at the threshold of this newborn haven would be a desecration. It would poison the very peace they were trying to build, tainting the land's magic with the stain of violence and death. He proposed a different path, one of subtlety over strength. He would lead a small, swift sortie himself, armed not with swords, but with light and illusion. Their goal was not slaughter, but dissuasion. Under the cover of a moonless night, Elrond and a handful of his most agile trackers moved like ghosts to the foothills. They found the creatures there, a pulsing, restless mass, sniffing at the edges of the valley's aura. Elrond did not give the order to draw steel. Instead, he raised a single hand. From his palm erupted not a bolt of destructive force, but a brilliant, silent burst of pure white light. It was not meant to blind, but to reveal. In that shocking illumination, the twisted forms of the creatures were laid bare, their unnaturalness amplified. Then came the illusions. The ground before them seemed to crack open into a bottomless chasm. From that illusory pit rose phantoms of towering, armored elves, their faces stern and their eyes burning with a cold fire. The creatures recoiled, hissing in confusion and fear. They were not being attacked, they were being herded. The light and the illusions pressed in from one side, creating an invisible wall that gently, irresistibly pushed them back, away from the passes, back toward the dark lands from which they had crawled. The strategy worked. The nameless things scattered, driven away by a fear of the unknown that outweighed their attraction to the magic. Elrond's company returned to the valley without a single drop of blood spilled. Yet the victory felt hollow. This was not a battle won, but a temporary reprieve. The encounter proved two things beyond any doubt. First, the sanctuary would work. Its power could be wielded with wisdom to protect itself without corruption. But second, and more chillingly, the enemy's gaze had found them. Rivendell was no longer a secret dream in a hidden valley. It was a shining fortress in the shadows, and the shadows would now be constantly testing its walls. This was the price of building where the world's magic converged. You did not just tame the land, you painted a target on it for every dark thing that hungered for power. The valley's newly won peace felt thin as parchment stretched over a hidden flame. Deep within a chamber, carved behind the largest waterfall, a place where the roar of the guardian river was a constant, thunderous hymn, Elrond stood before a forge unlike any other. Its fire was not born of simple coal, but drawn from the converging streams of magic that met beneath the valley. Here, the raw power of earth, the restless energy of air, and the deep wisdom of water were focused into a single, searing point. His purpose was to forge a tool of preservation, one of the three rings for the Elven kings. He would create Vilya, the ring of air. The process was not a smithing of metal alone, but a weaving of song and light. As the mithril band took shape, he channeled the valley's harmonized magics into its form, binding the very essence of the sanctuary's calm skies and gentle breezes into the cool metal. But to complete the weaving, to make the ring a living part of the refuge and not just a symbol, required a final, permanent sacrifice. He had to anchor it with a piece of himself. Elrond turned his gaze inward, and from the core of his spirit, he drew a fragment of his own essence, a sliver of his immortal life force. This was not a temporary expenditure of energy, like the song that calmed the waterfalls or the light that warded the shadows. This was a severing. He poured that piece of his soul into the great blue sapphire that crowned the ring, and as he did, a profound and permanent weariness settled into his bones, a quiet emptiness that would never again be filled. The moment the gem accepted his gift, Vilya flared with a soft, azure light. Its power did not merely reside in the ring, it radiated outward, an invisible wave that washed through the entire valley. The very air of Rivendell changed. It grew clearer, sweeter, and carried with it a tangible sense of protection and peace. The sanctuary was now complete, its stability guaranteed for ages to come. But this magnificent achievement came with a hidden, terrible price. By tying his own spirit so intimately to the ring and the land, Elrond had woven his fate and the fate of Rivendell into the same magical tapestry. The same convergence of power that gave Vilya its strength also created a channel, a vulnerability. Should a greater, dominating power ever arise, a force crafted to rule all such rings, the connection would become a conduit not for protection, but for control. The One Ring, if it were ever wielded by a dark will, would not just command Vilya, it would command Elrond himself, and through him, it could unravel the very sanctuary he had bled to build. He knew this risk in the moment of the ring's creation, a chilling certainty that settled in his heart like ice. He accepted it, not for personal power, but for the greater good. The refuge had to stand, no matter the personal cost. The heir of Rivendell was now eternally blessed, but its founder was now eternally bound, a king in a gilded cage of his own making, waiting for a shadow that might one day find his key. The final stone was set, and the last song of power faded into the air, yet Rivendell still felt new, its piece a fragile echo in a world growing ever darker. It was then that a single, silver-leaf sapling arrived, a gift from Galadriel of Lothlorien. This was no ordinary tree, but a scion of the white tree of Numenor, a living vessel of memory and lost light. Elrond carried the young tree to a quiet, sun-drenched shelf of land, overlooking the river, and with his own hands, he planted it in the rich soil. This was not an act of architecture, but one of pure, defiant hope. As its roots delved deep, they did not simply seek water. They tapped directly into the converging streams of magic that flowed beneath the valley. The tree drank not only from the earth, but from the very essence of the sanctuary Elrond had forged. And it gave back. A gentle radiance, pale and clear as starlight, began to emanate from its bark. The air around it grew still and profoundly quiet, as if the very concept of worry could not cross its boundary. The Grove of Memory was born, a living, breathing heart of peace within the larger refuge. Warriors who had forgotten the taste of safety found their hands unclenching. Scholars burdened by ancient lore felt their minds clear. It was a place of genuine restoration, but the tree's roots reached further than anyone could have foreseen, into realms beyond the physical. Its light, a beacon of pure and unsullied memory, began to attract those who were memory themselves. At first, they were mere shimmering at the edge of vision, like heat haze on a summer day. Then they took form, or the suggestion of form. They were spirits, echoes of elves who had faded long ago, their voices lost to the wind, their stories unfinished. They were not malevolent, not like the shadows in the caves. They were sorrowful, drawn to the white tree as a solitary candle draws moths on a vast, dark plain. They carried with them the weight of ages, a collective melancholy that began to seep into the very soil of the grove. The air, once simply peaceful, now held a poignant sweetness, the beauty of a sunset that heralds a long night. Elrond was faced with a choice. He could raise wards, as he had in the deep caves, and gently push these mournful spirits away, preserving the grove's initial purity. But to do so would be a rejection of the very memory the tree represented. It would be building a refuge only for the living, and turning his back on the long, tragic story of his own people. He stood in the grove one evening, watching the ethereal figures drift silently between the trees, and he understood. Their sorrow was not a stain to be cleansed. It was a part of the story this sanctuary was built to tell. He chose to let them stay. He opened the grove to them, a final haven even for those who were already ghosts. The consequence was immediate and permanent. The Grove of Memory was never again a place of simple, unburdened joy. Its profound peace was now intertwined with an equally profound sadness, a beautiful, heartbreaking melody that would forever play just beneath the sound of the waterfalls. In allowing the spirits to reside there, Elrond had accepted that true sanctuary cannot only be a shield against the dark, it must also be a home for the scars the dark has left behind. The refuge was now complete, but its heart beat with a quieter, more complicated rhythm. The grove's poignant quiet was broken by the urgent clamor of arrival. A band of men, their cloaks travel-stained and their faces etched with a grim weariness, had found the hidden path. They were the Dunedain, descendants of Numenor, and they carried one of their own, a chieftain bleeding from a poisoned wound that no mortal healer could mend. They stood in the courtyard, their eyes not wide with wonder at the elven architecture, but narrowed with a deep-seated suspicion. To them, this hidden valley was not a sanctuary. It was a retreat, a place where the elves had withdrawn from the world's struggles, hoarding their power and their peace behind a veil of mist and magic. Their leader, a grim-faced warrior named Elendil, voiced the doubt festering in all their hearts. You build walls of air and song while the world outside burns. What use is your refuge if its gates are closed to those who need it most? Elrond heard the accusation, and he did not dismiss it. He looked at the dying man, and then at the faces of the men who saw his home as a selfish dream. He knew that a simple act of healing would not be enough to bridge this chasm of distrust. To prove that Rivendell was for all free peoples required more than skill. It demanded a sacrifice they could see and understand. He ordered the chieftain brought to a chamber open to the sky. He did not gather rare herbs or chant complex spells. Instead, he knelt beside the man and placed his hands directly upon the festering wound. He did not seek to destroy the poison with a flash of power. He began to draw it out, to pull the corruption into himself. This was no subtle weaving of light. It was a brutal, physical transfer. As the black venom left the man's body, a visible grayness seeped into Elrond's own skin. The lines on his face deepened. Strands of his dark hair shimmered and turned silver in a single, breathless moment. The men watched, their skepticism turning to awe, and then to a kind of horrified reverence. They were witnessing an immortal age before their eyes, giving years of his own limitless life to save one of their finite ones. The chieftain drew a clean, deep breath, his fever broken. Elend, Yor looked from his healed leader to the now visibly older elf lord, and the anger in his eyes dissolved into a profound, humbled gratitude. He dropped to one knee, not in submission to a king, but in respect to a sacrifice. "My lord Elrond," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "our people are yours. This vow, sworn not in a grand hall, but in the quiet aftermath of a personal cost, echoed far beyond that courtyard. It cemented Rivendell's purpose. It was no longer just an elven refuge, but a true crossroads for all who fought the shadow. Yet this hard-won trust was as fragile as the morning dew. Elrond had proven his commitment beyond any doubt, but he had also revealed a vulnerability. His power was not infinite, and every such act of supreme generosity left its permanent mark. The sanctuary was now bound to the fate of men, its doors irrevocably open. This meant that the peace of Rivendell would forever be tested by the struggles of the outside world, its fate intertwined with the hopes and sorrows of every soul who now saw it as their own. The echoes of men's gratitude had barely faded when the masons broke through a rock face, revealing not another foundation, but a void that breathed despair. The new opening exhaled a cold, silent magic that did not threaten or attack. It simply settled over the workers, draining all color from their world. A seasoned dwarf, who had laughed in the face of collapsing tunnels, now sat with his head in his hands, weeping for losses he could not name. An elf, her spirit usually bright as a summer morning, felt a hollow ache, a grief for all the beauty that had ever faded from the world. This was no enemy to be fought. It was a sorrow so ancient and deep, it had seeped into the stone itself. Elrond sent the workers away and entered the weeping caves alone. The darkness there was not empty. It was heavy, a palpable weight of memory. He did not raise a light, for this was not a place for light. He simply stood and listened with his spirit, and the truth of the place unfolded within him. This was not a cursed ground. It was a grave, a natural memorial to a battle so terrible and forgotten that the land itself had absorbed the final, silent scream of the fallen. The very rock wept for warriors whose names were lost to time. The instinct of any builder would be to seal such a place, to wall up the sadness and build atop a lie of forgetfulness. But Elrond saw a more profound truth. To bury this grief would be to deny a part of the refuge's very purpose. A true sanctuary does not only protect from sorrow, it must also acknowledge it, giving sorrow a place to exist without consuming the heart. He gave a command that seemed to defy all reason. They would not seal the caves. Instead, they would build the Hall of Fire directly above them. The great hall rose, a place of warmth and soaring song, its massive hearth forever alight. Its floor was not a barrier, but a bridge. The joy created above, the music and the shared tales of courage, did not silence the mourning in the stone below. It answered it. The profound grief of the caves and the defiant joy of the hall began to resonate, creating a powerful, stable equilibrium. You could sit by the fire, feeling its warmth seep into your bones, while a subtle, sobering awareness of ancient loss hummed quietly beneath your feet. It was not a conflict, but a conversation. This architectural choice defined the complex soul of Rivendell forever. The refuge was not a denial of the world's pain, but a response to it, a place where both hope and heartbreak could find a home, each giving the other its true meaning. The central arch of the main bridge stood incomplete, a gaping maw of failed ambition. No matter how beautifully the elven masons sang the stones into place, their enchantments of air and light would fray within hours, leaving the granite blocks groaning and threatening to plummet into the river below. The dwarves scoffed, insisting the design was too delicate, all elegance and no spine. Yet when Narva's crew attempted to reinforce it with their own massive, unadorned lintel, the stone itself seemed to reject the brute force, cracking under a weight it should have easily borne. The archway, destined to be the symbolic heart of the refuge, was failing because each craft, in isolation, was only speaking half of a necessary language. Elrond watched the frustration mount, a petty echo of the greater conflicts outside the valley. He called both parties to the unstable site, the chasm beneath them, a physical representation of the divide they had to cross. He did not command a compromise. He framed a question. What if the stone itself is not the problem, but the conversation we are having with it? The arch stands at the confluence of the river's flow and the mountain's breadth. It must be of the earth and of the sky, not one or the other. He proposed a fusion so radical it silenced them both. The dwarves would not merely set the stone. They would sing the mountain's deep, enduring strength into the granite's core, a chant of unyielding permanence. As their voices rose, a low, resonant hum that made the very ground tremble with stability. The elven masons did not sing their own separate song. Instead, they listened, and then they began to weave. Their higher, clearer melodies entwined with the dwarven chant, tracing the paths of the stone's internal strength, guiding it and giving it a form that could dance with the wind rather than resist it. Elrond stood between them, his own spirit acting as a conductor, ensuring the two powerful magics did not clash but resonated in a single, magnificent chord. As the final keystone was set, a visible wave of silver blue light shimmered from the granite, sinking into the stone and then fading, leaving the arch not just physically solid, but humming with a quiet, latent power. It was no longer just a bridge. It was a living symbol, a testament to what could be built when ancient divides were mended not by erasing differences, but by harmonizing them. From that day, the craftsmen of both peoples shared their forges and their song schools. Their rivalry transformed into a deep, lasting respect. The first high summer arrived, and the valley's heart began to beat out of rhythm. For 3 days, the light did not move in a steady arc across the sky, but seemed to shimmer and skip. A traveler would round a corner and catch a fleeting glimpse of a courtyard filled with unfamiliar faces, only for the vision to dissolve into the quiet of the present. Another, resting by the river, would hear the echo of a long-forgotten song or the whisper of a conversation not yet spoken. The very fabric of time was stuttering, the converging magics of the land causing past, present, and future to bleed into one another. Panic was the expected response, a desperate attempt to shore up the walls of reality. But Elrond watched these flickering echoes and saw not a flaw to be corrected, but a truth to be embraced. The sanctuary was built upon a place where all things met, and that included all moments. To fight this phenomenon would be as futile as commanding the river to flow uphill. So he chose a different path, one of radical acceptance. He declared a festival. He gathered everyone, elves, dwarves, and the few mortals who dwelled there, into the Hall of Fire. He did not promise them the strange visions would cease. Instead, he gave them a purpose. He asked them to share stories, as the temporal ripples washed through the hall, causing the flames in the hearth to burn with the blue of ancient days or the gold of an age to come. Voices rose. An old dwarf recounted the tale of his grandfather witnessing the first star, and for a moment, his listeners could smell the cool air of a world newborn. A young elf sang a lay of a love she had not yet met, her voice trembling with a future joy. They were not just telling tales, they were casting anchors. Each shared memory, each hopeful prophecy, was a thread stitched into the trembling present, holding it firm against the tide of overlapping time. The Midsummer festival was born from this necessity, a deliberate act of community in the face of cosmic uncertainty. It transformed a potential weakness, a day when the laws of the world softened, into Rivendell's greatest source of wisdom and unity. The festival became a living library of all that was and all that might be, a tradition that did not resist the valley's unique nature, but celebrated it, weaving the chaos of time itself into the enduring strength of shared experience. The vibrant woods just beyond the final bridge began to show a strange sickness. Leaves, once a deep and healthy green, curled at the edges into brittle, papery brown. The ancient oaks seemed to stoop, their branches hanging lower, as if under a weight no one could see. A subtle but vital energy was being drawn from them, siphoned away by the constant, humming need of the sanctuary's own defenses. The wards that held back the shadows and calmed the river, the very enchantments that made the air sweet, required a continuous flow of power, and they were pulling that sustenance directly from the living land around them. The refuge was thriving at the expense of its own doorstep. Elrond walked this blighted border, his fingers brushing against a wilting flower. He felt the slow drain as a personal failure, a quiet hunger he had not foreseen. His council was divided. Some urged expansion, to push the borders outward and claim more land, more power, to fuel the dream of an ever-growing haven. But Elrond saw the terrifying end of that path. It was the logic of a parasite, consuming its host until nothing remained but a beautiful, lifeless fortress in a dead land. He faced the most difficult choice since he first set foot in the valley. He could let the sanctuary grow, knowing it would eventually consume the very beauty it was built to protect, or he could deliberately limit it. He chose limitation. The construction ceased. No new towers would rise. No new courtyards would be carved from the mountainside. Instead, every ounce of will and magic was turned inward to deepen the protections they already held. The wards were refined, not widened, their patterns woven tighter and more efficient. The energy required to sustain them lessened, and the slow withering of the borderlands halted. This decision defined Rivendell's ultimate purpose for all time. It would never be a sprawling kingdom or a dominant power. It was a sanctuary, a deeply protected pocket of peace, consciously and deliberately finite. By accepting its limits, Elrond ensured its longevity. It would not burn brightly and vanish. It would endure as a steady, unchangeable light, a quiet promise in a world of flux, precisely because it asked for no more than the land could freely give. The wind that once carried only the scent of pine and the murmur of the river began to change. It started as a faint, discordant note, a whisper of syllables just beyond comprehension. Soon, the gentle breezes weaving through the arches of Rivendell were laden with more than pollen. They carried echoes, fragments of conversations from 100 leagues away, the desperate thoughts of a traveler lost in the mountains, and chillingly, the cold deliberations of the enemy's lieutenants. It was a chaotic symphony of distant fears and hidden plans, a direct and uncontrollable side effect of the concentrated magic converging within the valley. The sanctuary's own power was broadcasting the world's secrets, but they arrived as a maddening, indecipherable static. Elrond watched his people grow uneasy, their peace disturbed by phantom voices on the wind. He knew this was not a flaw to be silenced, but a resource to be understood. He could not listen to every whisper himself, for the burden of Vilya and the sanctuary's governance already weighed heavily upon his spirit. So he made a deliberate choice. He sought out those elves with the oldest blood, the ones who could still hear the subtle music of the world itself, and he gave them a new, solemn duty. They were to become lore masters, not merely keepers of old tales, but active interpreters of the living present. Their task was to sit in the high, open pavilions, to still their own hearts, and to listen. They learned to separate the random noise from the meaningful signal, to weave scattered words into coherent warnings, a whisper of mustered troops in the south, a fragment of a spell being forged in a dark tower, a prophecy murmured by a dying seer. These pieces were gathered and assembled into a picture of the wider world's movements. This system, born from necessity, became Rivendell's unseen, early warning network. It was how they learned of orc armies mustering in secret passes long before any scout could return. It was how they knew which paths were safe for the Dunedain to travel. Yet this great advantage came with a profound personal cost for the listeners. To open one's mind so completely to the wind was to open it to the world's pain. The lore masters heard not just strategies, but the final, terrified thoughts of those slain in distant battles. They felt the despair of enslaved peoples and the corrosive drip of dark ambitions. The terrible knowledge they gathered etched itself into their souls, leaving them with a sorrow that their peaceful surroundings could not erase. They carried the weight of every warning, knowing that a single misinterpreted whisper could mean death for many. They were the sanctuary's unsung sentinels, their vigilance paid for with their own peace of mind, ensuring that the refuge was never truly blind to the very darkness it was built to withstand. The whispering winds of distant sorrow found a gentle answer one clear, cloudless night. A single point of light tore across the starry expanse, growing from a silver scratch on the sky to a descending brilliance that hummed with a music older than the world. It fell not with a world-shattering crash, but like a feather of pure light, settling deep into the valley's heart with a soft, resonant chime that vibrated through every stone and stream. It was a shard of a star, a gift sent by Elbereth herself, a seed of the undying light from beyond the circles of the world. The elves who witnessed it fell to their knees, not in fear, but in awe, for the air around the fallen star smelled of rain-washed skies and the profound silence between constellations. Elrond approached the crater, the light within so pure it cast no shadow. His counsel was swift and divided. The warriors saw the ultimate weapon, a blade that could blind the enemy's legions. The lore masters envisioned a seeing stone of unparalleled clarity, but Elrond looked into that core of celestial fire and saw something else entirely, the very antithesis of a tool for war. He gave an order that seemed to defy all strategic sense. The star fragment would not be mounted on a hilt or set in a crown. It would be placed at the bottom of the central fountain, the heart from which all the sanctuary's waters flowed. The task of moving it was a ceremony in itself. They used no tools of metal, but great nets of woven moonlight and songs of guidance, their voices trembling with the effort of coaxing the fragment into its new home. As it settled into the fountain's basin, the clear water did not boil or steam. It began to glow with a soft, internal radiance, as if absorbing the star's essence. The change was immediate and profound. The waters that trickled through every garden and filled every cup now carried a fraction of that celestial peace. A warrior drinking from a stream felt the sharp edges of his anger soften into resolve. A scholar, plagued by a labyrinthine problem, found her mind clearing as if a fog had lifted. The water did not erase sorrow or fear, but it gently untangled the knots of dark thoughts, offering a clarity that felt like a quiet dawn after a long night. This was the final, defining touch on Rivendell's soul. The sanctuary was not a fortress that repelled darkness through sheer force. It was a place that healed it, that renewed the spirit from the inside out. The Star Kindler's gift made the act of drinking of bathing, of simply sitting by the water, into a subtle act of cleansing. The waters became sacred not through ritual, but through their inherent, gentle power to remind every weary soul of the light that existed before shadow and the peace that could be found again. The star-kindled waters flowed with a clarity that seemed to heal the very air, yet some shadows are not so easily washed away. From the oldest, unworked stone of the mountain, a new presence began to stir. It was not a spirit of sorrow or a creature of malice, but a sharp, resonant echo of ancient pride. It took no physical form, but its voice filled the corridors, a commanding baritone that demanded obedience. It was the lingering will of a long-dead elven king, a fragment of his unyielding arrogance that had seeped into the rock at the moment of his fall. The echo did not attack the buildings, it attacked their purpose. It whispered to the dwarves that their work was crude, unworthy of alliance. It hissed to the elves that their lord, Elrond, was a mere half-blood, unfit to rule a refuge of such consequence. The fragile harmony between the peoples, so carefully built, began to fray under this relentless, invisible assault. The sanctuary's spiritual peace was cracking. To meet this challenge with force, to try and shout down the echo or blast it from the stone, would have been to repeat the very pride that had created it. Elrond understood this. He walked alone into the great hall where the voice was strongest, a cold, psychic wind tearing at his resolve. He did not raise a shield of light or sing a song of banishment. He stood silently, letting the accusations of inadequacy and the boasts of forgotten glory wash over him. And then he did the one thing the echo could not expect. He acknowledged it. He did not argue. He spoke to the empty air with respect, naming the king and his great deeds, honoring the memory of the strength that now manifested as stubborn pride. He then spoke of the king's grief, the hidden, unspoken sorrow that must have accompanied such a fall from grace. He gave voice to the echo's own hidden heart. The voice faltered. The torrent of arrogance stuttered into silence. In that quiet, Elrond made his offer. He did not offer the echo a throne or power. He offered it a story. He promised the lingering will that the king's memory would have an honored place in the Refuge's history, that his triumphs and his failures would be sung in the Hall of Fire, not as a cautionary tale, but as an essential thread in the great tapestry of their people. The king's echo would not be a ruler here, but a remembered part of the whole. The spectral pressure in the hall vanished. The cold wind became a gentle sigh, and then nothing. The prideful echo was not destroyed, but dissolved, its energy transmuted from a weapon of division into a note in the sanctuary's enduring song. This quiet victory secured the spiritual foundation of Rivendell more firmly than any ward ever could. It proved that the greatest power in this haven was not the magic to command, but the wisdom to understand and the courage to offer compassion, even to a ghost. The sanctuary's starlit peace was a treasure that demanded a hidden door. With the enemy's power spreading like a stain across the map, the obvious routes into the valley were becoming watched, and then they would become trapped. Elrond knew that a refuge with only one way in was no refuge at all, but a cage. He led his most trusted scouts on a moonless trek along the valley's most treacherous edge, a place where the mountain itself seemed to turn its back on the world. They found what they sought not with their eyes, but with their spirits, a narrow fissure in the rock that felt less like an opening and more like a held breath. This was not a path that could be widened with picks or shovels. It had to be sung into existence. Elrond and his scouts did not sing of stone and mortar. They wove a melody of forgetting and seeking, a song that asked the mountain to remember only those who came with a heart free of malice, whose intent was purely for shelter or to aid the cause of the free peoples. The enchantment settled over the fissure like a shimmering veil, and the path awoke. It was a subtle, living thing. A desperate family fleeing orcs would find a previously unseen deer trail opening before them, leading them unerringly to safety. A lone ranger carrying a vital warning would feel an inexplicable pull, a certainty in his step that guided him through seemingly impassable terrain. The path found the worthy, not the other way around. Yet this magnificent act of creation came with a permanent and heavy cost. A portion of the valley's harmonized magic, a steady stream of power that once flowed into the groves and the healing waters, had to be diverted. It was channeled outward to perpetually cloak the hidden way, to whisper its directions only to the right hearts, and to cloud the minds of those who sought it with evil intent. This was a constant, silent drain, like a vessel with a slow, eternal leak. The air in Rivendell grew no less sweet, the waters no less clear, but the margin of its power grew thinner. Every life saved by the hidden path was a life bought with a fraction of the sanctuary's own strength. Elrond had ensured that the refuge would never be closed to those who truly needed it, but in doing so, he had accepted that its own light would burn just a little less brightly, forever. The steady, quiet drain of the hidden path had not gone unnoticed. The very land felt the subtle shift in its own lifeblood. One evening, as the last light bled from the sky, the four corners of the valley began to breathe. From the deepest cave, the spirit of earth emerged, her form a shifting silhouette of stone and root. From the Bruinen rose the spirit of water, a figure of flowing crystal and relentless current. The spirit of air descended as a shimmering vortex of autumn leaves and mountain breath, while from the central forges, the spirit of fire coalesced into a being of contained, dancing flame. They were the incarnate voices of the valley's raw power, and they stood now in a silent circle around Elrond. Their presence was not hostile, but it was immense, a pressure that demanded truth. The spirit of earth spoke first, her voice the rumble of a mountain slide. You have taken much from us, half-elven. You have woven our strength into your walls, and our peace into your air. For what final purpose? Do you build a nest or a weapon? Do you seek to guard or to rule? The question hung in the air, and the fate of the sanctuary balanced upon the answer. Elrond did not look to the great library or the gleaming ring upon his finger. He looked at the faces of the few mortal children who now played in the courtyards, and at the weary Dunedain resting in the groves. He met the gaze of each elemental spirit in turn, his own weariness a testament to the cost of every stone laid. He drew a breath that felt like his first and his last, and he made a vow. By the light of Rivendell, my father, I swear it, he said, his voice clear and unwavering. This place will never be a sword. It will never be a throne. It will be a shield. Its gates will remain open to any of the free peoples who come here with a heart free of malice, seeking only shelter from the storm. Its strength will be for the defenseless, its wisdom for the lost, its peace for the broken. It will be a sanctuary forever, He offered his open hands, empty of any weapon, in a gesture of ultimate surrender and trust. The spirits were silent for a long moment, weighing the truth in his words, feeling the sincerity that resonated in the very magic he had woven. Then, the spirit of fire, its form softening from a roar to a warm hearth glow, spoke. So be it. Let the vow be the final stone. In that moment, the four spirits did not bow to him. They flowed into the sanctuary itself. The spirit of earth sank into the foundations, and the stonework gained a permanent, unshakable warmth. The spirit of water spread through the network of fountains and streams, and the star-kindled waters hummed with a new, vibrant life. The spirit of air wove itself through the arches and towers, and the breeze carried not just whispers, but a tangible sense of guardianship. The spirit of fire settled deep within the hall of fire's hearth, its flame now an eternal, comforting promise. The bonding was complete. Rivendell was no longer a structure built upon the land. It had become a living entity, its heart beating in time with the mountain, its breath the wind, its blood the river. The refuge was now truly one with the world's magic, its purpose sealed not by spell, but by an unbreakable oath. A vow sealed in stone and spirit demanded a fortress for memory. The elemental harmony that now breathed through Rivendell made its peace palpable, but Elrond knew that peace without memory was a hollow comfort. He envisioned a great hall, not for feasting or council, but for preservation. This would be the library of lost tales, a sanctuary for knowledge itself, where the histories and artifacts of all free peoples would be gathered. He believed that the most potent weapon against the spreading shadow was not a sword, but a story remembered, a song preserved from fading into silence. To fill this library, however, required more than sending out requests. It demanded a personal, perilous pilgrimage into the ruins of the world. Elrond chose a journey that his council begged him to avoid, a trek into the skeletal remains of a fallen elven kingdom in the far, cold north. Its libraries had been swallowed by a slow, creeping forest, their wisdom guarded by things that hated the light. He went alone, for a company would have drawn too much attention. For weeks, he navigated crumbling arches and root-choked halls, the air thick with the decay of forgotten glory. He finally found his prize in a collapsed scriptorium, a single, intact chest of black wood, bound with silver, its lock fused shut by time. As he lifted it, the silence broke. The forest itself seemed to awaken, the roots twisting like serpents to block his exit, and from the deeper shadows emerged pale, spectral forms, the lingering guardians of this dead place. They were not creatures of flesh, but of pure resentment, and their touch was a cold that sought to freeze his very soul. Elrond fought not with a blade, but with light, a brilliant shield woven from his own spirit. The effort was a screaming drain in that suffocating dark. He felt his strength fraying, his own memories beginning to blur at the edges as he pushed back against the ancient hatred. He barely escaped, stumbling back into the sunlight with the chest clutched to his chest, his robes torn and his body shaking with a chill that no fire could warm. He had paid for this knowledge with a piece of his own vitality. When the chest was opened in the new library, its contents were revealed not as dusty scrolls, but as the foundational songs of the first elven awakenings, the very music that had given the stars their names. This single recovery, and the many perilous journeys that followed, transformed Rivendell. It became the one place in Middle-earth where a dwarf could study the annals of men, or a hobbit, had any yet ventured there, could learn the love songs of the elves. The library was not a tomb for dead words. It was an armory for the mind, ensuring that no matter how dark the night became, the light of memory could never be fully extinguished. The wards hummed with a new and unified strength, a resonant chord of earth, water, air, and fire. For a time, the valley knew a peace that felt, for the first time, unshakable. Then the mountains began to whisper. It was not the usual voice of the wind through the high passes, but a low, guttural muttering that seemed to rise from the stone itself. The very light in the valley dimmed, not from cloud cover, but as if the sun itself was struggling to penetrate a gathering gloom. This was no random surge of wild magic. This was a deliberate, concentrated assault, a spear of pure shadow and psychic fear, sent by the enemy to test this new, shining bastion before it could fully root. The wards did not buckle, but they screamed. A visible, bruised purple energy slammed against the invisible boundaries, not with physical force, but with a wave of utter despair. Every elf in Rivendell felt it, a cold hand closing around their hearts, whispering of inevitable defeat and the futility of their fragile hope. The dwarves, sturdy as they were, felt a deep, existential dread, a sense that their stonecraft was but dust waiting to be scattered. Elrond did not rally his warriors or draw a sword. He walked calmly to the main archway, the point where the assault was most focused. He stood there, a single figure silhouetted against the roiling darkness, and he opened his mouth, but what emerged was not a shout or a spell of banishment. It was a song. This was not the complex weaving of power he had used to build the sanctuary. This was something far simpler and far more costly, a melody of such pure, defiant hope that it seemed to draw its strength from the very core of his being. He sang of the first sunrise after a long darkness. He sang of a single green shoot breaking through barren rock. He sang of laughter echoing in a hall that had known only silence. He offered no counterattack, only a gentle, unwavering affirmation of light. The song cost him everything. As he sang, his form seemed to grow translucent, the light within him pouring out to reinforce the trembling wards. The assault of shadow recoiled, not from a blast of power, but from an essence it could not comprehend or corrupt. The bruised purple energy shattered like dark glass, and the unnatural gloom lifted as if it had never been. The victory was absolute. The sanctuary's defensive concept had been proven beyond any doubt. But as the last note faded, a profound silence fell, broken only by the sound of Elrond's knees striking the stone of the courtyard. He did not fall, but he was utterly spent, held up by his lieutenant, his face ashen, and he was not alone. Every elf in the valley felt a deep, spiritual exhaustion, as if a part of their own inner light had been used as fuel for the song. They had won, but they now understood the terrifying arithmetic of their safety. Every such assault, no matter how successfully repelled, would drain them. The refuge would hold, but its guardians would pay for its peace with a piece of their own souls, every single time. A profound weariness had settled into the very stones of the refuge, a quiet echo of the guardian's own exhaustion. Elrond understood that a sanctuary, no matter how perfectly defended, was ultimately a reactive creation. To truly oppose the growing shadow, Rivendell needed to act, not merely endure. It needed a voice in the wider world, a hand to guide, and a sword to protect beyond the misty borders of the valley. He required a herald. The choice was not a matter of politics or seniority, but of essential nature. He turned to the one being whose very presence was a declaration of hope, Glorfindel. This was no ordinary elf lord. Glorfindel had faced a Balrog upon a mountain pass in a previous age, and had died in that cataclysm of flame and shadow. His spirit had passed through the halls of Mandos, and had been returned to Middle-earth. His body remained, now radiating a power that made the hearts of evil things quail. He had looked upon the darkness, and had not been broken. In him, the light of the undying lands was a tangible force. Elrond did not merely appoint him. In a quiet ceremony beneath the silver-leaved tree, he vested Glorfindel with his own authority. He gave him not a sealed scroll or a token of office, but a shared resonance of purpose. When Glorfindel spoke to the scattered Dunedain chieftains, or the hesitant lords of men, it was not just his own voice they heard, but the unwavering will of Imladris itself. He became Rivendel's will made manifest. Its protection extended along the wild roads its refugees traveled. This decision fundamentally changed the structure of their leadership. Elrond was the sanctuary's heart, its steady, unmoving core. Glorfindel became its outstretched hand. One remained to guard the flame, while the other carried a spark of it into the darkest places. This division of roles was a necessary evolution, but it created a new and potent vulnerability. The enemy, who had tested the valley's wards directly and failed, now had a new target. Glorfindel was a beacon of immense power, but he was outside the walls. To strike him down would be to sever Rivendel's reach, to isolate the sanctuary once more, and demoralize all who looked to it for hope. Every mission he undertook was a calculated risk, a wager that his strength and the authority Elrond had placed in him would be enough against the countless dangers that now hunted him specifically. Rivendell was no longer just a place on a map. Its influence was now a living, traveling thing, and its greatest champion walked with a target on his back. The subtle shimmer in the air was the first sign of their success, a permanent veil of mist and illusion now cloaking the valley from any prying eye. Yet the silence in the circle of elves was not one of triumph, but of quiet, personal loss. To power such a monumental enchantment, a spell woven from the very fabric of perception, required a fuel more potent than simple magic. Elrond had asked each participant to sacrifice a single, cherished memory, to sever it from their own spirit and offer it into the weaving. One gave up the recollection of her child's first laugh, the sound now forever silent in her own mind, though its joy would help confuse an enemy scout. Another surrendered the memory of a perfect, star-filled night with a beloved who had long since sailed to the west. The ache of that loss now transmuted into a shimmer that bent light away from their borders. Elrond himself offered the memory of the first time he held his daughter, the overwhelming, pure love of that moment, now eternally woven into the veil's core. They did not speak of what was gone, for to speak of it would be to feel the hollow space it left behind. Instead, they carried on their duties with a new and profound solemnity. The laughter in the halls was a little quieter. The songs in the grove held a deeper, more wistful note. They had not just hidden the valley, they had paid for its secrecy with pieces of their own happiness, ensuring that every time they looked upon the protecting mists, they remembered the intimate cost of the peace they guarded. The refuge was now truly a hidden valley, a secret held safe by the forgotten joys of its protectors. The memory of lost laughter still hung in the newly enchanted air when the first of the small folk arrived. They were Harfoots, not warriors or scholars, but a family of quiet travelers with earth under their nails and a deep, unspoken understanding of growing things. They had been guided by the hidden path, their simple hearts pure of malice, their only intent to find a place to rest their heads away from the growing dangers in the wider world. Elrond watched them from a high balcony, their small forms dwarfed by the majestic arches, and a profound foresight settled within him. He saw not what they were, but what they would become, a people whose resilience and love of peace would one day be as vital as any sword. He did not summon them to a grand hall. He met them in a sunlit garden, kneeling so his eyes were level with theirs, and he spoke not of alliances or wars, but of soil and seed. He formally offered them the sanctuary of Rivendell, not as a temporary haven, but as a home they could always return to. Then he made a strategic decision that seemed to defy all conventional wisdom. He chose to share some of the valley's simpler secrets. He showed them how the starlit waters, when used to nourish the earth, could encourage plants to grow with a heartier strength and a sweeter fruit. He taught them the gentle songs the elves used to calm a fever or help a wound knit clean, melodies that required no great power, only a kind and focused intent. This was not a gift of overwhelming magic, but one of practical, nurturing wisdom. The Harfoots, in turn, shared their own deep knowledge of the land, of which wild herbs promoted rest, and which roots could store nourishment through a long winter. A bond was forged in that garden, one of mutual respect that bypassed the usual hierarchies of Middle-earth. It was a pact not written on parchment, but in the turning of the soil and the sharing of a quiet song. As the Harfoots eventually moved on, continuing their wandering ways, they carried with them more than just memories. A faint, almost imperceptible draw to the safety of the Elven refuge had been woven into the very fabric of their being, a spiritual tether that would pull at their descendants for generations to come. Elrond had planted a seed that day, a quiet investment in a future he could only barely glimpse, trusting that the smallest of peoples might one day hold the greatest of hopes. The first ritual of dawn was not a grand ceremony, but a quiet act of necessity. After the profound cost of the great veiling, a lingering fatigue had settled over the elves, a weariness that threatened to become permanent. Elrond watched the subtle dimming of their inner light and knew the sanctuary's peace could not be sustained by a few great acts of power alone. It required a daily, collective breath. He gathered his people as the first sliver of sun touched the highest peaks and taught them a single, perfect chord. This was not a complex song of creation or a spell of banishment. It was a note of pure resonance, a frequency designed to hum in harmony with the valley's own magical convergence. As their voices rose together, a visible shimmer passed through the air, not like a shield hardening, but like a tapestry being gently smoothed. Its threads tightened and its colors brightened. The very stones of the courtyards seemed to sigh in relief, and the star-lit waters in the fountains sparkled with renewed vigor. For the elves themselves, the effect was immediate and deeply personal. The hollow spaces left by sacrifice memories did not fill, but the edges of that loss grew softer, soothed by the shared vibration of the cord. The spiritual exhaustion from repelling the enemy's assault was gently washed away, not erased, but refreshed, like a field after a soft rain. This daily symphony became the non-negotiable heartbeat of Rivendell. It was a ritual that demanded the participation of every elf, from the oldest lore master to the youngest apprentice. There were no exceptions. If one voice was missing, the chord felt incomplete, the resonance slightly off, a subtle discord that everyone could feel in their bones. This requirement forged a profound and practical unity. It bound the community together not through edict, but through a shared, active purpose that renewed their home and their spirits with each new sunrise. The ritual ensured the sanctuary's strength was not a static wall, but a living, breathing entity, maintained by the collective will of its people. It was a promise they made to the valley and to each other every single day, a constant, gentle effort that made the great, costly enchantments possible, proving that the most enduring magic is not found in a single moment of sacrifice, but in the quiet, relentless work of renewal. The final stone of the main entrance was set not with a song of defiance, but one of discernment. It took the form of two graceful, interwoven arches that seemed to grow from the living rock, a structure that offered no obvious barrier, no heavy gate to be barred shut. Its power was not in its strength, but in its subtlety. Anyone could walk through it, but none could do so unchanged, for the arches were a mirror for the soul, a final and gentle test of the heart. A traveler approaching with selfish ambition, perhaps a lord seeking to claim the valley's power for his own, would feel a growing, inexplicable unease with every step. The very air would seem to thin, the beauty of the surroundings becoming a source of agitation rather than peace, until he turned away of his own accord, his spirit rebuffed. But a soul weary from flight, a refugee whose only intent was shelter, would feel the stones hum beneath their feet, a quiet vibration that eased their burdens and filled them with a profound sense of arrival. Elrond had chosen a gate that judged, rather than one that simply blocked. This decision finalized the sanctuary's identity in a way no wall ever could. Rivendell would not be a stronghold for the powerful, a fortress where the mighty gathered to hoard their strength. It was, and would forever remain, a haven for the worthy. Its protection was not measured by the thickness of its walls, but by the purity of the peace it offered. The character of the refuge was now set in stone, as surely as the arches themselves, a permanent declaration that the greatest security lies not in excluding danger, but in welcoming the right hearts. The new gate's discerning archways had only just settled into their silent watch, when a deeper wrongness made itself known. It began as a faint, acrid scent on the wind, a smell of cold ashes and spoiled earth that led Elrond and a small party to a grove they had once thought pristine. There, hidden in a bowl-shaped hollow, the land was sick. The grass was not merely dead, but charred black, and the very soil seemed to writhe with a sluggish, visible shadow. This was no natural decay. It was a scar, a remnant of some long-ago battle with a servant of the enemy, a pocket of pure malice that had festered in secret for an age, poisoning the land from within. The instinct to purge it was immediate, to call upon the full force of Vilya and scour the blight from existence with a blaze of cleansing light. But Elrond felt the truth of the place. This shadow was not an invader. It was a part of the valley's own history, a wound that had never been allowed to heal. To destroy it violently would be to repeat the original act of violence, to tear the wound open anew and leave another kind of emptiness behind. He knew a more difficult path was required, one of transformation, not annihilation. He ordered no weapons brought, no spells of banishment prepared. Instead, he called for the lore masters, the singers, and those with the gentlest hands. As dusk fell, they formed a wide circle around the blighted ground. They did not attack the shadow, they began to sing to it. Their song was not one of light against dark, but a slow, patient melody of acknowledgement and grief. They sang of the pain that had created this scar, of the fear and the anger that had been poured into the soil. They did not seek to overpower the blight, but to understand it, to offer its trapped energy a different shape, a different purpose. Elrond stood at the edge of the darkness, his own spirit acting as a conduit. He reached into the festering energy and began, with agonizing slowness, to unravel it. It was like trying to untangle a knot of frozen thorns, each thread of shadow resisting, each pull draining his own strength. He did not cast the darkness out, he painstakingly gathered it, drawing the seething mass upward from the soil. As the song reached its peak, the collective will of the elves pressing in on the shadow, the formless blight began to condense. It swirled in the air above the grove, a vortex of purified anguish, and then it collapsed inward upon itself. Where the darkness had been, there now hung a single, perfect crystal, about the size of a human heart. It was deep, smoky gray, and within its facets, tiny points of captured starlight seemed to flicker, a beautiful and sorrowful prison for the transformed malice. It pulsed with a soft, melancholic light, and when it settled gently upon the now clean earth, the grass did not immediately regrow around it. The crystal rested on a small patch of bare, humble soil, a permanent and sobering monument. This was the final act of the valley's internal healing. The sanctuary was now whole, not because every trace of sorrow had been erased, but because even its deepest scars had been redeemed, turned into a lesson etched in crystal for all who would see it. Victory was not the absence of darkness, but the wisdom to give even darkness a purpose, to make it a part of the story without letting it dictate the ending. The anniversary of the first foundation stone arrived under a sky of woven light. On that single night each year, the converging magics of the world did not merely hum beneath the valley, they erupted into a silent, celestial display. A shimmering aurora of silver, gold, and deep earth green danced above the spires of Rivendell, a visible testament to the power Elrond had spent so much of himself to harmonize. The entire refuge gathered, their faces upturned in the otherworldly glow, feeling the air itself thick with potential. It was a moment when a lesser lord might have sought to claim that power, to forge a weapon or a crown. Elrond looked upon that convergence and saw only a final, perfect opportunity to secure the sanctuary's purpose for all time. He stepped into the center of the main courtyard, the aurora swirling directly overhead, and he began to speak. His voice was not loud, but it carried through every stone and stream, into the heart of every listener. He did not chant a spell of his own making. He spoke a vow, a promise to the world itself. He declared that this refuge, Imladris, would stand so long as a single spark of hope remained alive in any free heart, in any corner of Middle-earth. He was not drawing power into the valley, but weaving the valley's fate outward, tying its existence to the collective will of all who resisted the shadow. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The shimmering lights in the sky did not fade. They flowed downward, a river of soft radiance that soaked into the buildings, the trees, the very air. A final, unbreakable enchantment settled over the sanctuary, but its strength was no longer rooted in Elrond's spirit alone, or even in the valley's magic. Its resilience was now sourced from a Dunedain ranger's courage on a windswept hill, a hobbit's quiet contentment in a sunny field, a dwarf's stubborn loyalty to a sworn oath. This meant the sanctuary could never be destroyed by a single, overwhelming assault. An enemy army could breach the physical walls, but the refuge would simply rebuild itself from the hope of those who believed in it. Its stones would draw strength from distant courage. Its waters would be cleansed by remote kindness. This was the ultimate fulfillment of Elrond's vision. Rivendell was no longer his sanctuary. It belonged to every soul who chose light over darkness. Its fate and the fate of all good were now one and the same, a bond sealed under an aurora of convergent magic, ensuring that as long as there was a heart left in the world that cherished peace, this haven would have a place to exist. The first test of the discerning archways came not with a herald or a warrior, but with the desperate cries of a human family, filthy and trembling, their clothes torn by thorns and fear. They stumbled from the tree line, a mother and father clutching two small children, their eyes wide with the memory of pursuing orc screams. The hidden path, sensing their pure and frantic need for shelter, had revealed itself to them, leading their exhausted feet directly to the valley's heart. They collapsed in the main courtyard, not in awe of the elven architecture, but in the sheer, overwhelming relief of having outrun the shadows. The elves who gathered around them did not see future allies or strategic assets. They saw the raw, human cost of the darkness gathering beyond their mists. Elrond was summoned, and he looked upon this broken, vulnerable group. His vow to the elemental spirits echoed in his mind, a promise that these gates would remain open to any with a heart free of malice. Here was the living embodiment of that oath. He did not convene a council to debate the risks of inviting the enemy's attention. He knelt beside the wounded father, placing a hand on the man's fevered brow, and began the slow, careful work of drawing out the poison of a black-feathered arrow. As the man's breathing eased, Elrond made his decision known. They would stay. They would be healed, fed, and given a home for as long as they needed. This was not a temporary courtesy. It was a precedent, etched not in law, but in compassion. The family's simple hut, built for them near the protective sound of the river, became a powerful symbol. Soon, another family arrived, then a lone shepherd who had lost his flock to wolves, then a scholar fleeing a burned library. Each was judged not by their wealth or status, but by the weariness in their spirit and the innocence of their intent. Rivendell's primary function, once a noble idea, was now a lived reality. The refuge was breathing, its pulse measured in the heartbeats of the saved. The elemental spirits, watching from the stone and the water, felt the truth of Elrond's oath fulfilled. He had not built a fortress for the powerful, but a true shelter for the powerless. With every wound healed and every frightened soul comforted, the sanctuary's purpose became unshakable, its foundation reinforced by every life it preserved. The first whisper of the call was a shard of ice in his veins. Elrond stood perfectly still in his study, the morning sun warm on his back, yet a cold dread had seized him from 1,000 leagues away. It was not a sound, but a pull, a voracious hunger that reached for him through the sapphire on his finger. Vilya, the ring of air, flared with a defensive light, and in that moment of resonance, he felt it. The One Ring had been awakened. The pain was both searing and subtle, a psychic wound that throbbed in time with a will that was not his own. It whispered of dominion, of a power so absolute it could bend all of Middle-earth to its command, and it promised that power to him, if only he would reach for it. The temptation was a physical ache, a hook in his spirit. He could have recoiled, could have tried to shield himself from this horrific new vulnerability. To feel the enemy's most potent weapon as a personal agony was a torment beyond any physical wound. But as the wave of dark suggestion receded, leaving a dull, constant ache behind, Elrond saw a terrible opportunity within the pain. This connection, forged in the very magic that powered his sanctuary, was a channel that ran in two directions. If he could endure the call, if he could listen to its cadence without answering, he could learn from it. The intensity of the pull would tell him of Sauron's growing strength. The frequency of the whispers would reveal his urgency. He made the decision in that silent, sunlit room. He would not block this torment. He would use it. He would make his greatest vulnerability into his most vital instrument. The pain became his canary in the mine, a constant, private barometer for the shadow in the east. When the ache sharpened into a blinding migraine, he knew the Dark Lord was marshalling his forces. When it faded to a low hum, he could guess at a period of consolidation or doubt. This strategic choice granted Rivendell an early warning system no scout could ever provide, but the cost was borne by Elrond alone. He learned to mask the sudden, silent flinches, to hold a steady voice while a scream of dark power echoed in his mind. He carried this burden in the deep quiet of his own spirit, a king with a poisoned thread tied directly to his heart, forever feeling the twitches of the spider who held the other end. The ache in Elrond's spirit sharpened into a single, silent scream. Far to the east, the eye had opened, its gaze a wave of pure negation rolling across the land. It did not carry fire or the clamor of armies. It carried nothing. It was a psychic tide of absolute despair, a command to cease, to believe that every song was meaningless, every memory a lie, and every hope a foolish flicker soon to be snuffed. The wards of Rivendell, so powerful against physical force, offered no purchase against this. They hummed, strained, and began to fray as the void approached. Elves in the groves felt their hands grow heavy, their ancient songs turning to ash in their mouths. The dwarves felt the stone of their craft whisper that it would all be dust. The very light in the valley began to dim, not from shadow, but from a profound, collective doubt. Elrond walked into the central courtyard, the ring Vilya blazing on his hand like a captive star. He felt the despair like a physical weight, an ocean of nothingness, poised to crash down and drown his life's work in a single, suffocating moment. The instinct to fight, to raise a shield of pure will, was overwhelming. But he knew that to resist with force was to accept the premise of the attack, to engage in a battle of wills that the sheer, crushing nihilism would inevitably win. So he did the one thing the darkness could not comprehend. He surrendered, not to the enemy, but to the truth of what he had built. He did not raise a shield. He opened his own heart, and through Vilya, he opened the heart of the valley itself. He became a conduit, not for power, but for meaning. He did not project defiance. He projected a memory of a Dwarven father, teaching his son the first notes of a stone-shaping song. He projected the sensation of cool, starlit water on a fevered brow. He showed the quiet courage of a mortal mother, singing her child to sleep in a world of shadows. He poured forth the scent of parchment in the library, the warmth of the Hall of Fire's hearth, the sight of the first green shoot after a long winter. He offered the love between friends, the weight of a promise kept, the fragile, stubborn act of planting a tree in a broken land. It was a tapestry of everything that was worth fighting for, a profound and silent affirmation of life itself. The wave of despair hit this projection and shattered. It had no answer for it. You cannot convince nothingness that it should prevail against a father's love or the memory of a shared laugh. The void recoiled from the sheer, defiant substance of these things. The pressure vanished. The light returned, warmer and more cherished than before. Rivendell was saved, not by the strength of its walls, but by the depth of its heart. The sanctuary had proven its ultimate defense was not the magic woven into its stones, but the simple, indestructible hope it had been built to safeguard. In the quiet that follows, Rivendell stands serene, its magic now a gentle, self-sustaining hum. Elrond walks its pathways, his steps a little slower, the silver in his hair, a permanent testament to the countless fragments of his spirit he has given away. He passes a courtyard where a Dwarven smith laughs with an Elven loremaster over a shared flask of wine. He hears the chatter of mortal children playing near the fountain, their voices mingling with the soft splash of the star-kindled waters. The air itself is thick with a peace that has been earned, not commanded. He sees that the sanctuary is no longer his creation to sustain. It has become its own living entity, a legacy that breathes with the collective hope of all who dwell within its borders. He did not build a fortress designed to repel the darkness with sheer, unyielding force. He built a home for light, a place where even the deepest sorrow could find a gentle acknowledgement and a quiet space to heal. This choice, made over and over at great personal cost, is what ensures its endurance. As long as a single story is remembered in its halls, as long as one act of courage is sung by its fires, the last homely house will remain. It is more than a location on a map. It is a living promise, a permanent convergence point for the world's most enduring magic, the simple, stubborn will to seek out light, even in the deepest shadow.